You've touched a tree before. You pressed your hand against the bark and walked away. But something you couldn't see and couldn't feel started happening inside your body the moment your skin met that surface. And it was still happening 7 days later. The problem is that the tree you touched is not what you think it is. Hold your hand out right now. Look at your fingertips. You've touched hundreds of things today. A doorknob, a coffee cup, your phone, the fabric of your clothes. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. You have never touched a single one of them. Not once in your entire life. The electron clouds surrounding the atoms in your skin repel the electron clouds in everything you reach for. Electromagnetic force pushes back across a gap that never closes. What your brain interprets as contact is just force across empty space. Every texture you've ever felt, every handshake, every surface you've ever pressed your palm against, all of it, electromagnetic repulsion. The gap is always there. So when you put your hand on a tree, your skin doesn't actually meet the bark, but something does cross that gap. Not through contact, through the air between you. And what crosses that gap is the first thing nobody ever explains. Trees are releasing molecules into the air around them right now, not occasionally, constantly. These are volatile organic compounds, molecules light enough and loosely bound enough to escape into the gas phase at ordinary temperatures. Alpha-pinene, beta-pinene, D-limonene, 1,8 cineol. They have a name, phytoncides, and that word does not mean what people selling essential oils want you to think it means. It was coined in 1928 by a Russian biologist named Boris Tokin, and it literally translates to exterminated by the plant. These are chemical defense weapons. The tree manufactures them to kill bacteria, fungi, and insects. The tree is not releasing pleasant aromas. It is waging chemical warfare on everything small enough to be destroyed by airborne molecules. And here is where the physics matters. Once these molecules enter the gas phase, they follow fixed laws. Diffusion. Molecules move from regions of high concentration to regions of low concentration. The tree is the source. Maximum concentration at the bark surface. The air around it is the gradient field. 1 hectare of pine forest releases roughly 5 kilograms of these antimicrobial molecules into the air every single day. Forest air contains 200 to 300 bacterial cells per cubic meter. City air contains thousands. The diffusion field around the tree is, in a measurable sense, a sterilization zone. When you stand near a tree, you are standing inside that cloud. When you touch the bark, you are at the point of maximum concentration. Your lungs pull 6 to 8 liters of air per minute at rest. Each breath carries these molecules across the thin membrane of your alveoli and into your bloodstream. The physics is simple. Gas phase diffusion into a low-pressure biological system. The consequences are not simple at all. In 2009, a research team led by Dr. Ching Li at Nippon Medical School in Tokyo exposed human subjects to phytoncides and measured what happened to their immune cells over the following weeks. Natural killer cells, the specific class of lymphocytes, whose function is to identify and destroy tumor cells and virus-infected cells, showed significantly increased activity, not for hours, not for a single day. The increase lasted more than 7 days from a single exposure. Extended exposure over 2 or 3 days produced effects lasting more than 30 days. The same studies measured adrenaline and noradrenaline concentrations in subjects' urine and found significant reductions. The stress hormones that drive your fight or flight response physically decreased in the presence of these diffusing molecules. Think about that. Molecular compounds following a concentration gradient through an air gap, entering through your respiratory system, and altering the behavior of specific immune cells for weeks. Not relaxation, not fresh air, not placebo. Physics. But that is only the first mechanism. There is a second one operating through the same tree at the same time. A tree is an electrical conductor. Its root system is in direct contact with the Earth's surface, which carries a net negative charge, a charge maintained by the global electrical circuit driven by roughly 2,000 active thunderstorms happening at any given moment around the planet. When your conductive skin contacts a grounded conductor, charge flows. Electrons move from the Earth, through the tree, and into your body. A study published in 2013 measured what this does to human blood. Grounding increased the zeta potential on red blood cells, the electrical charge on the cell surface that determines how strongly cells repel one another. Higher zeta potential means your red blood cells spread apart rather than clumping. A measurable change in blood viscosity from electron transfer through a tree trunk connected to the ground beneath your feet. And there is a third mechanism. This one is a trick your own nervous system plays on you. Wood conducts heat roughly 1,000 times more slowly than metal. When you grab a metal railing on a cold morning, the metal pulls heat from your skin instantly. It feels freezing. Wood does not do this. Your hand stays warm, and your brain reads that warmth as comfort, as the object giving you something. But the tree is not giving you warmth. It is simply failing to take it away. Your nervous system cannot distinguish between an object that provides heat and an object that simply does not conduct it away. Thermophysics creating a neurological illusion of warmth that has nothing to do with the tree and everything to do with conductivity coefficients. 3 mechanisms. Molecular diffusion delivering antimicrobial compounds along concentration gradients. Electron transfer modifying blood cell charge through a grounded conductor. Thermal conductivity generating an illusion of comfort in your somatosensory cortex. All measurable, all operating through the air gap between your skin and the bark. Not metaphor, physics. Now think about what the tree actually is. A mature oak weighs around 10,000 pounds. Conservation of mass says that weight came from somewhere. Every atom in that trunk existed before the tree did. So where did 10,000 pounds of solid mass come from? The obvious answer is the soil. Roots go deep, pull material up, material becomes tree. That feels right. And a man named Jan Baptist van Helmont thought so too. In 1648, he designed one of the most elegant experiments in the history of science. He dried 200 pounds of soil in an oven, weighed it precisely, and planted a 5-pound willow sapling in it. He covered the pot with a perforated tin lid to keep out dust and debris. For 5 years, he watered it with nothing but rainwater. When he finally uprooted the tree and weighed everything, the willow had grown to 169 pounds. It had gained 164 pounds of solid mass. He dried the soil and weighed it again. It had lost less than 2 ounces. 164 pounds of mass had appeared, and it had not come from the soil. Van Helmont concluded it must have come from the water. Reasonable guess, but think more carefully. Water is H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, and wood, the hard, dense structural material of a tree, is made primarily of carbon. Carbon is a heavier atom. Roughly 50% of the dry weight of any tree is carbon atoms. Not hydrogen, not oxygen, carbon. Water contains no carbon. Soil barely changed. All the minerals a tree pulls from the ground together account for only 1 to 2% of total dry mass. Trace amounts. So where did the carbon come from? This is a genuine physics puzzle, and the answer is one of the most beautiful in all of science. It came from a gas, carbon dioxide, CO2, a molecule that makes up just 0.04% of the atmosphere. An invisible trace gas hanging in the air around Van Helmont's experiment the entire time he was running it. Trees pull carbon dioxide through tiny pores on their leaves called stomata. Inside the leaf, they strip the carbon atom from the CO2 molecule, chain those carbon atoms together into glucose, and release the leftover oxygen. That released oxygen is your breathing air. Every breath you take exists because a tree somewhere stripped carbon from the atmosphere and discarded the oxygen as waste. But the mechanism of that stripping is where the physics becomes remarkable. Put your hand on the nearest wooden surface right now, a desk, a door frame, a shelf. What you are touching was assembled by starlight. Sunlight is electromagnetic radiation traveling at 300 million meters per second from a star 93 million miles away. When a photon of the right wavelength strikes a chlorophyll molecule in a leaf, it kicks an electron to a higher energy state. That electron has absorbed the photon's energy. It enters an electron transport chain, a sequence of molecular machines embedded in the membrane of the chloroplast, and its energy is extracted step by step to build ATP. That ATP then powers the breaking apart of carbon dioxide, one of the most stable small molecules in nature. The carbon atom is freed and forged into glucose through new electromagnetic bonds, carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon, a chain, a structure, a solid. Glucose becomes cellulose. Cellulose becomes reinforced with lignin, and wood exists. Electromagnetic energy from a star, captured by a pigment molecule, converted to chemical bond energy, holding carbon atoms in fixed positions. Photon energy in, solid matter out. A 10,000-pound oak is solidified air. Crystallized atmosphere built atom by atom from an invisible gas, assembled by captured starlight. Here is the part of this story I find extraordinary. Van Helmont, the man who designed that beautiful experiment, the man who proved definitively that the mass did not come from soil, spent years trying to figure out where it went. And the answer was floating invisibly in front of his face the entire time. But here is the twist. Van Helmont coined the word gas. He derived it from the Greek word chaos to describe the invisible vapors he kept encountering in his experiments. He was the first person in history to recognize that there were different kinds of invisible air. He invented the word for the very thing that held his answer, and he still missed it. The man who named gases could not see that a gas was building his tree. Every plank of wood in your house, every page of every book you have ever held, every forest on this planet, all of it was once invisible carbon dioxide drifting through the atmosphere. When you touch a tree, you are touching centuries of electromagnetic energy from a star, locked into chemical bonds between carbon atoms pulled from thin air. And every breath you exhale contains carbon dioxide leaving your lungs. Some of those carbon atoms were once part of food you ate, which was once a plant, which pulled those atoms from the air. You are exhaling atoms that have been through this cycle before. The carbon in your breath was once a tree, or a blade of grass, or a fern 300 million years old. And the tree standing next to you right now is pulling some of those atoms back in through its leaves, stripping the carbon, building it into wood. You are breathing out what the tree is breathing in. You are part of the same carbon cycle, the same physics, the same conservation law, running in opposite directions. But you have been thinking about this tree as if it were standing alone, a single organism, a solitary thing rooted in one place. It is not. In the early 1990s, a young forest ecologist named Suzanne Simard was working for the British Columbia Ministry of Forests. The standard forestry practice at the time was to strip everything, cut the commercial trees, bulldoze the remaining vegetation, plant rows of Douglas fir seedlings in clean soil. And the seedlings kept dying. They had sunlight, water, soil, and space. Everything a tree should need. But they died at rates far higher than seedlings growing in natural forests with older trees around them. Simard suspected the seedlings were dying because they had been cut off from something underground, something connecting them to all the trees. She proposed that trees in a natural forest were sharing resources through fungal networks in the soil, and that the clear-cut seedlings were starving because the network had been destroyed. In the 1990s, this sounded like mysticism, not science. The prevailing model was competition. Trees compete for light, water, nutrients. The forest is an arena. Every tree for itself. Senior colleagues told her this work would end her career. She designed the experiment anyway. She went into the forest with plastic bags, syringes, a Geiger counter, and 2 different radioactive isotopes of carbon. She covered individual birch and fir seedlings with sealed bags, injected air containing radioactive CO2, and let the trees photosynthesize the labeled carbon into their tissues. Then she moved to neighboring trees that had never been exposed to either tracer gas and tested their tissues. The counter clicked. Radioactive carbon was inside trees that had never been given any. Carbon was flowing between trees through underground pathways, through something physical, something structural, connecting root system to root system beneath the surface. The pathways are mycorrhizal networks, fungal threads thinner than a human hair that grow from the tips of tree roots and extend outward through the soil, connecting one tree's root system to another's. A single fungal network can span an entire forest. 1 teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains miles of these threads. The oldest, largest trees are the hubs, the highest degree nodes. The younger trees are the peripheral nodes connected to them. Virtually every tree in a forest is linked. The network is not scattered patches of connection. It is one continuous web. And the traffic flowing through this network is not trivial. Paper birch and Douglas fir exchange carbon seasonally. In summer, when young Douglas firs are shaded by the canopy and struggling to photosynthesize, birch trees send carbon through the fungal connections to sustain them. In winter, when birch has dropped its leaves and cannot make sugar, Fur returns the favor. The network redistributes resources from surplus to deficit, a kind of equilibration across connected nodes driven by concentration gradients. The same diffusion physics that governs the phytoncides in the air governs the carbon flow underground. But it is not just nutrients. Chemical signals propagate through the network. When a Douglas fir is attacked by insects and sustains tissue damage, it releases defense compounds into the mycorrhizal network. Neighboring trees, including different species connected through the same fungal web, begin producing defense enzymes before the insects have even reached them. Information transmitted through a physical substrate. Chemistry traveling through fungal fiber in the dark, beneath the forest floor. The oldest trees in a forest, Simard calls them mother trees, function as the highest degree nodes. They have the most fungal connections, the most resource flow. And they do something that surprised even Simard. They recognize their own offspring. Using DNA analysis, her team mapped which seedlings received the most carbon from which mature trees. Mother trees sent significantly more carbon to genetically related seedlings than to unrelated ones growing at the same distance. They also physically pulled back their own roots to make space for their seedlings to establish. And when a mother tree is dying, when disease or damage is killing it, it dumps its carbon reserves into the network. A massive pulse of resources pushed outward to the connected trees before the hub goes offline. A final act of distribution from a dying node. A tree that recognizes its offspring, feeds them preferentially, makes physical space for them, and when it dies, sends everything it has left into the network for the others. Now. In the White Mountains of California, in a harsh landscape of wind-scoured rock and thin air, there is a bristlecone pine named Methuselah. It is 4,857 years old. It was alive when the Egyptian pyramids were under construction. It has been photosynthesizing continuously through the rise and fall of every civilization in recorded human history. The United States Forest Service keeps its exact location secret to protect it. There was another bristlecone pine, even older, at least 4,162 years old, possibly more than 5,000. In 1964, a geography graduate student named Donald Curry was studying glacial history in eastern Nevada. He was coring bristlecone pines to count their growth rings for climate data, standard dendrochronology. His increment borer got stuck in one particular tree. The tool jammed, and he could not extract it. He asked the Forest Service for permission to cut the tree down to retrieve his equipment. They said yes. He cut it down. And only after he began counting the growth rings on the stump, ring by ring, working inward from bark to heartwood, did he realize what he had done. The count went past 1,000, past 2,000, past 3,000, past 4,000. He had destroyed the oldest known living organism on Earth, nearly 5,000 years of continuous life, a tree that had been photosynthesizing since before the invention of writing, since before the wheel, since before any human civilization that still exists. Ended because a coring tool got stuck and a bureaucrat signed a permission slip. Curry never fully recovered from it. He rarely spoke about the incident for the rest of his career. Now, these trees survive not by being strong, they survive by being mostly dead. Bristlecone pines use something called sectored architecture. At any given time, only a narrow strip of bark on the tree is alive. A thin ribbon of living cambium connecting a small section of roots to a handful of green needles. 95% of the tree is dead wood, but that dead wood is so dense and so saturated with resin that it does not rot. It erodes like stone, worn down by wind and ice over millennia, rather than consumed by bacteria. The needles stay on the branches for 40 years, conserving the energy that other trees spend regrowing leaves every spring. The tree sacrificed nearly all of itself to keep a sliver alive. Why don't trees age? You age. Every animal ages. Right now, as you read this, your telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes, are shorter than they were 10 years ago. Every time one of your cells divides, those caps get a little shorter. Your DNA is accumulating copying errors with every division. Your cells are gradually losing the ability to replicate accurately. This is programmed senescence. It is not a disease. It is a feature built into animal biology. You have a clock inside every cell in your body, and it is counting down. Trees do not have this clock. Their meristematic cells, the dividing cells at the tips of every root and branch, replicate indefinitely. The cambium layer, that thin ring of living tissue just beneath the bark, produces fresh wood and fresh bark every year without degradation. Researchers studying ancient bristlecone pines found something remarkable. Telomerase activity, the enzyme that rebuilds telomeres, the very thing that wears down in your cells, was higher in the oldest trees than in young ones. The older the tree, the more actively it maintained its chromosomes. The cells of a 5,000-year-old bristlecone pine show no molecular indication of knowing how old they are. So what kills them? Physics, not biology. Physics. Wind force scales with surface area, and surface area increases with the square of height. A tree twice as tall catches 4 times the wind load. Water transport through the xylem, the narrow columns of dead cells that pull water upward purely by tension, requires increasingly extreme negative pressure as the tree grows taller. At 300 feet, the negative pressure approaches what physicists call the cavitation limit, the point where the water literally tears apart, dissolved gases form bubbles, the column breaks, and the transport line fails. This is why the tallest trees on Earth, coast redwoods at roughly 380 feet, are near the theoretical maximum. Not because their biology cannot grow taller, because the physics of water under tension will not permit it. And then there is the square cube law. Mass scales with the cube of height. Cross-sectional strength of the trunk scales only with the square. Every inch of growth makes the structure proportionally weaker relative to its own weight. Eventually, the physics accumulates. Lightning finds the tallest point. Wind catches the largest surface. Drought breaks the water columns. The structure fails. But the cells, the living dividing cells in the cambium, those were fine. Those would have kept going. The biology did not fail. The engineering did. The bristlecone pine solved this by refusing to grow, staying small, growing slowly, sometimes less than an inch of new wood per century. Sacrificing height and mass and surface area to minimize wind load, minimize water transport demands, minimize structural stress. It traded scale for time, and it worked for almost 5,000 years. Every tree on Earth is caught between 2 forces. Its biology wants to keep going. Cells dividing, cambium growing, life continuing without any internal limit. But its physics is a countdown. Every ring of growth adds mass, adds height, adds surface area, brings the structure one increment closer to the point where something external will destroy it. Trees are biologically immortal organisms living inside structures that physics will eventually break. Stand next to any tree and think about what you now know. You are touching solidified air, carbon atoms pulled from the atmosphere and forged into chemical bonds by electromagnetic energy captured from a star 93 million miles away. The wood under your hand is centuries of starlight made solid. And right now, without you feeling a thing, 3 physics mechanisms are operating on your body through the gap between your skin and that bark. Molecular diffusion is delivering antimicrobial compounds that will alter your natural killer cell activity for the next 7 days. Electrons are flowing from the ground through the trunk into your body, modifying the electrical charge on your red blood cells, and your brain is registering warmth that does not exist. A thermal illusion created by low conductivity coefficients that your nervous system has no way to distinguish from real warmth. Beneath your feet, a scale-free network of fungal threads connects this tree to every other tree around it, redistributing carbon and chemical signals through a web that was operating before you were born and will continue after you are gone. The tree you are touching is not an individual. It is a node. It recognizes its offspring. It feeds them through the network. And when it is dying, it will send everything it has left into the system for the others. And the tree itself, the living cells in its cambium, may be functionally immortal, dividing without degradation, telomerase rebuilding, no biological clock, no expiration, limited not by aging, not by disease, not by any failure of its own cells, but by the square cube law, by wind force, by the cavitation limit of water under tension 300 feet above the ground. Physics writes the death certificate for every tree on Earth, never biology. You touched a tree once. You touched it and walked away and thought nothing had changed. Everything had changed. You just could not see it. Neither could Van Helmont, the man who invented the word for what he could not see, who held the answer in the air around him for 5 years and never recognized it. A flower does not become less beautiful when you understand the physics. It becomes something more. And the same is true for every tree you have ever walked past without stopping. Touch one tomorrow, not because it is spiritual, because it is physics.